Somebody once told me the best things in life don't come the way you order them. They come sideways. They come with the wrong paperwork and a dent in the fender, and a name that isn't yours stapled to the manifest. And they come, more often than not, looking like something you'd pay a man to haul away. I didn't believe that. Not for 51 years I didn't. I believed in ledgers. I believed in what you wrote down and what you could carry, in fence lines and feed weights, and the number at the bottom of the page that told you whether you'd eat come winter. I believed that a thing was worth exactly what it was worth, and not $1 more, and I'd have argued that point with God himself over a cup of bad coffee. Then a livestock trailer took a wrong turn off the county road, and a man I'd never met unloaded a horse I'd never asked for onto a ranch that was quietly, respectably, going broke. She was the ugliest animal I have ever seen in my life. I want to be honest about that, because everything that comes after only means something if you understand where it started. She was not a diamond in the rough. She was not a secret champion under a coat of mud. She was a sway-backed, jug-headed, moon-eyed wreck of a mare with a scar across her chest like somebody had tried to unzip her, and when she came down that ramp she stumbled, and half the men there laughed. I didn't laugh. I don't know why I didn't. That's the part I've turned over 1,000 times since. Maybe because I was already so far down that laughing felt like a thing rich men did. Maybe because the way she stumbled reminded me of somebody. Maybe I just didn't have it in me that day. The dust told me before the sound did. That's a thing you learn out here, if you live long enough on a bad road. You feel a vehicle before you hear it. Feel it through the boot soles as a kind of low disturbance in the world. And then you look up, and there's the tan plume rising off the section road a mile out, and you've got about 2 minutes to decide who you're going to be when it arrives. I was up on the loading chute that afternoon, replacing a rail that had rotted through the winter, and I remember I had 3 galvanized screws held between my lips like a seamstress holds pins, and I remember thinking, in the flat, unbothered way you think about weather, that whoever it was had missed their turn. Nobody came up my road on purpose anymore. My road went to my place, and then to the old Havorson quarter that the bank had eaten in 19, and past that to nothing but a dry wash and a no trespassing sign the color of an old bruise. The truck was a 2-ton with a stock trailer behind it, and it came up my drive too fast, the way a man drives when he's already late and already lost, and has decided the 2 facts are somebody else's fault. It stopped in a slide of gravel that would have made my father wince. The driver leaned out the window before the dust had even settled. "You Delgado," he hollered. I took the screws out of my mouth one at a time and set them on the top rail, buying time. I've always bought time that way, with small, deliberate motions, ever since I was a boy and learned that a slow hand makes an angry man wait on you instead of the other way around. "No," I said. "Name's Harlan Cobb. This is the Cobb place. Delgado's the next brand over, but that's—" I pointed with my chin east into the low afternoon glare. "That's 40 Mile. You want the river road, not the section road. Easy mistake." I said that last part to be kind. It was not, in fact, an easy mistake. You had to be genuinely, almost artfully lost to end up at my chute. But I'd been the lost man before, plenty of times, and I knew what it did to a fellow to be told he was a fool on top of everything else. The driver swore, quiet and comprehensive, and dragged a clipboard off his dash. He was a young man gone old in the face the way haulers do, all of them looking 40 regardless of the truth, sunburned on the left arm and pale on the right from 1,000 hours with the window down. He squinted at his paperwork like it had insulted his mother. "Cobb," he repeated. Cobb, no. I got a Delgado, one head, says here." He held the clipboard up and shook it as though the shaking might rearrange the letters into something that helped him. "I've been driving since 4 this morning. I got 2 more drops in the county, and the second one's a gate code I don't have and a phone that goes to a machine. You telling me 40 more mile?" "I'm telling you the road, not the miles. Miles are the same either way." He didn't laugh. Haulers rarely do. And that would have been the whole of it. A wrong turn, a corrected direction, a truck revering in my yard and grinding back down the drive, and I'd have gone back to my rail and my 3 screws, and this story would never have happened. Except that from the trailer, behind the slatted aluminum, something moved. And something made a sound. It wasn't a whinny. I've heard 10,000 whinnies, and this wasn't that. It was lower, and it broke in the middle, the way a voice breaks, and it had a question in it. I've never been able to describe that sound to anybody's satisfaction. My granddaughter, years later, when she was small and I was trying to tell her, said, "Like when you can't find your mom in the store." And I said, "Yes, that's exactly it. That's the sound. That's the one." I found myself walking toward the trailer before I decided to. I climbed down off the chute and crossed my own yard and put my face up to the slats, and inside, in the barred dark, an eye rolled toward me, wet and enormous and frightened, ringed all around with white. "What's wrong with her?" I said. "Nothing's wrong with her," the driver said, too fast, which is how you know a man's been told to say it. "She loads, she hauls, she's just—" he shrugged with his whole clipboard. "She's an ugly one is all. They didn't tell you what she was for." "They didn't tell me anything. She's not mine." "Right, Delgado." He wrote something. "Well, she's Delgado's problem in 40 Mile then." He said it the way you talk about a dented can. Then he reached to swing back up into the cab, and the mare in the dark made that sound again, that lost-in-the-store sound, and I heard my own mouth say the stupidest words I have said in my adult life. "Let me look at her." The driver stopped. "You want me to unload her, Bud?" I got 2 more. "I want to look at her. 5 minutes. You've had a long day, you can have a cold one out of the tank while I do it, and then you'll drive better for the next 40. Drop the ramp." I don't know what it was in my voice. There must have been something, because he did it. He dropped the ramp with a bang that made the whole trailer ring, and he stood back with his arms crossed, and the mare would not come out. She stood at the top of the ramp with her legs braced and her head down, and she trembled all the way through, and I saw her then in the daylight for the first time, in pieces, the way you see something too large to take in at once. I saw the scar first. It ran across her chest from the point of one shoulder down and inward, a long-healed seam gone hairless and shiny, the kind of wound that should have killed her and hadn't. I saw that one of her eyes was clouded, a blue-white marble that saw nothing, and that she carried her whole head cocked to favor the good one. I saw the sway of her back, deep enough to pour rain in. I saw ribs. I saw feet gone too long without a farrier, the hooves splayed and cracked and grown out into something closer to slippers than to anything that could carry weight across hard ground. And I saw under all of it that she was watching me, the good eye, fixed on me, not on the driver, not on the yard, not on the open country beyond, on me, waiting to find out what I was. I've been around horses my whole life. My father broke them and his father before him, and I learned young that a horse tells you the truth about itself in the first 10 seconds if you're quiet enough to let it. And what this ruined animal told me, standing at the top of that ramp with her whole body saying no while her one good eye said please, was that somebody had hurt her badly more than once, and that she had decided, against all the evidence, to give the world one more chance to prove her wrong. I have thought many times since that she and I recognized each other. That's a foolish thing to say, and I'll say it anyway. She and I recognized each other. "Come on then," I said, low, not a command, an invitation. "Come on, nobody here's going to do anything to you." She came down the ramp one shaking leg at a time, and she stumbled at the bottom where the ramp met the ground, and the driver made a small noise that in a kinder man would have been a laugh, and I put my hand up flat toward him without looking, and he swallowed it. She stood in my yard in the long gold light of a dying afternoon, and I walked around her once slow, letting her track me with the good eye, and I ran my hand down her neck and along her side, and where I touched her she flinched and then, a half-second later, leaned. That half-second is the whole of a broken creature. The flinch is what was done to them. The lean is what's still left underneath. I have met people like that. I have been a person like that. How much they paying Delgado to take her? I asked. The driver shifted. You'd have to ask them. I'm asking you, you've got the manifest. He looked at his clipboard, and then he looked at me, and then he made a decision to tell me the truth, which I have always been grateful for even though it broke something in me to hear it. They're not paying him to take her, he said. He's paying them. It's not my deal. There's an outfit down south does exotic hunts, private thing. They buy up the stock that can't sell, the old ones, the wrecked ones, the ones the auction won't touch. And they turn 'em out on fenced land and they let people. He stopped. He had the grace to look at his boots. You know what they do, I just haul, I don't ask. Delgado, he's the middleman. He collects 'em local and runs 'em down south by the trailer load once a month. This one was supposed to go on his string. The yard was very quiet. Somewhere behind the barn my windmill turned and creaked, the way it had every windy afternoon of my entire life, the sound of the place I was born. So she was ordered, I said slowly, to be shot for sport, by men with money, because she's ugly and old and won't bring a price any other way. I didn't say it like that. That's what you said. He didn't argue. The mare, done being afraid for the moment, had dropped her head and was lipping at a tuft of dead grass by the chute, and the ordinary animal sound of it, the soft tearing, the grinding of old teeth, was almost more than I could stand. I want to tell you that I made a noble decision right then. I didn't. What I did was start doing arithmetic, because that's who I was, that's who I'd made myself into over 5 decades of coming up short. I stood in my dirt yard, and I ran the numbers the way a drowning man counts the distance to a shore he already knows he can't reach. Here is what the numbers were. I had at that time $311 in my checking account, and a note at the bank that was 2 payments behind. I had 40 cow-calf pairs where 10 years before I'd had 200, and I'd sold down not because I wanted to, but because the drought had cooked my grass 3 summers running, and I couldn't buy hay at the prices hay was fetching. I had a truck with a transmission that slipped in second, and a well pump that was living on borrowed time, and a roof over the kitchen that let the sky in when it rained hard, which, to be fair, wasn't often. I had a wife's grave up on the rise under the 2 cottonwoods, 4 years fresh, and I had a daughter in the city who called on Sundays and asked me, every Sunday, in a careful voice, whether I'd thought any more about selling. And I had exactly nothing to spare for a broken horse that would eat and never carry a rider, never pull a load, never be anything but a mouth and a heartbreak and a slow argument with the ground. The math said give her back. The math said tell the driver to load her up and take her to Delgado and let Delgado do what Delgado did, and go back to my rail with my 3 screws and my ledger and the number at the bottom of the page. The math was clean. The math was correct. I had spent my whole life trusting the math. Well, the driver said, you want I should load her back up. I really have got to. No, I said. It came out of me before I understood it. It came out of the part of a man that the math never reaches. No, leave her. He stared at me. Leave her. She's on the manifest, man. She's Delgado's. I can't just, there's paperwork. There's money changed hands. If I show up short ahead, that's on me, that comes out. How much? What? How much did the outfit pay for her? What's she worth to Delgado on the manifest? Give me the number. He looked at the clipboard. His mouth worked. 200, he said. They buy 'em cheap. She's marked at 200. I went into the house. I remember the screen door slapping behind me, that particular flat crack it made, and I remember the kitchen dim and cool and smelling of the coffee I'd burned that morning, and I remember standing in front of the coffee can on the shelf where I kept the cash money because I didn't trust the checking account not to be swept by the bank without warning. I remember counting it out on the counter by feel, in the half-dark, my hands not quite steady. $200. That left me 111 in the can and 311 in the bank and a note 2 payments behind. And I stood there with the money in my fist, and I thought about my wife. Not any particular thing about her, Just her. Just the fact of her, which 4 years on still arrived in me like that sideways without warning in the middle of an unrelated act. She'd have known what to do. She always knew. She was the one who used to take in the strays, the dogs, the barn cats, the one winter a whole family of raccoons in the tack room that I swore I'd shoot and never did because she'd named them, and you can't shoot a thing that's been named. I used to complain about it. God forgive me, I used to complain about the feed bill on animals that would never earn their keep, and she'd look at me over the top of her glasses with that particular tilt of her head and she'd say, "Harlan, not everything that's alive has to earn it. Some things are just alive, and that's the whole job. Some things are just alive, and that's the whole job." I went back out with the money. The driver took it and counted it and looked at me like I'd lost my mind, which I had. And he wrote something on his manifest and had me sign it, my name looking strange to me in the fading light. And then he had a cold one from my stock tank after all, and told me I was a soft touch, and that soft touches went broke, which I already knew. And then he backed his rig around and ground off down my drive, and the dust of him hung in the air a long time after the sound of him was gone. And then it was just me and the ugly horse in the dark yard, and the windmill turning, and the whole enormous silence of the high country coming down over both of us like a held breath. "Well," I said to her, "God help us both." She looked at me with her good eye. I put her in the near paddock that night, the small one by the barn where I could keep an eye on her, and I forked her out hay I couldn't afford and broke the ice off the trough. It was cold for early, a hard, clear cold with all the stars out, and I stood at the fence a while watching her eat. She ate the way starved things eat, too fast, choking, then stopping to look up and check that I was still there, that I wasn't going to take it away, and then eating again. Somebody had taken food away from her. You don't eat like that unless somebody has. I've had dogs eat like that. I've seen children eat like that once. In a bad house I got called to help clear out, and I've never forgotten it. "Slow down," I told her. "There's more. There's always going to be more, you hear me." I don't know if she heard me, but she slowed down. That's where I'd end the first part, if I were the kind of man who ends things where they ought to end. On a soft note. An old widower and a ruined mare and hay in the cold, and a small mean victory over the arithmetic of the world. But life doesn't end its chapters where they ought to end. Life keeps the pen going right past the good stopping place and into the part you weren't ready for. Because the phone rang the next morning at 6:10, and it was Delgado. I knew it was going to be trouble before I picked up, the way you know the dust before the sound. Nobody calls a ranch at 6:10 with good news. I'd been up 2 hours already, out at the paddock in the pink cold checking on her, and she'd nickered at me when I came out, the first sound she'd made toward me that wasn't fear. And I was standing in my kitchen with that small, warm thing still glowing in my chest when the phone went, and I picked it up, and a voice I didn't know said my name like an accusation. "Cobb, Harlan Cobb." "Speaking." "This is Ray Delgado. My hauler tells me you bought a head off my manifest yesterday. Cash, off the truck." A pause, and in the pause I could hear him deciding how angry to be. "That mare wasn't for sale, Cobb. That mare was spoken for. I got a buyer down south expecting a full trailer end of the month, and your $200 don't cover what that costs me when I show up light." "Your hauler took the money," I said. "Signed manifest, it's done." "It's not done. My hauler doesn't have the authority to sell off my string in your driveway, and any court in the state's going to see it that way. That animal's mine. I want her back, or I want what she's actually worth to me, which ain't $200, Cobb. It's a good deal more than that, on account of what she was contracted for." And there it was, the clean chance, the one exit. All I had to do was let him send the trailer back, hand over the mare, maybe eat the 200 as the price of a soft heart and be done. Be a man who'd made a foolish gesture and thought better of it. Nobody would have blamed me. My daughter would have said it was the sensible thing. The math would have applauded. I looked out the kitchen window. She was standing at the paddock fence looking at the house. Looking, I want to say, at me, though I know a horse doesn't understand a window. She was standing there in the pink light with her breath smoking, and her ruined blind side turned away, and her good eye toward the house, waiting, the way she'd waited at the top of the ramp, for the world to prove her right or wrong one more time. "No," I said into the phone, "you can't have her back." The line went quiet. Then Delgado's voice came again, lower, and this is the part I've never told many people, because it's the part where I understood what I'd actually stepped into. "You don't want me for an enemy, Cobb," he said. "I move a lot of stock through this county. I know the brand inspector personal. I know your banker. Little outfit like yours, hanging on by its fingernails, I checked. I know exactly how you're hanging on. You don't want the aggravation. Give me the horse. Last time I'm going to ask nice." I looked at her a while longer through the glass. "Send whoever you want," I said. "Send the inspector. Send the banker. Send the sheriff if you can get him out of bed. She's not going back on your trailer, and she's not going south to be shot for a rich man's afternoon, and you can put that in your ledger any way you like." I hung up before he could answer, because my hand was shaking, and I didn't want him to hear it in my voice. Then I stood in my kitchen in the cold, and I understood fully, for the first time, what I'd done. I'd spent $200 I didn't have on an animal that would cost me a fortune I didn't have to keep alive, and I'd made an enemy of a man who moved stock and knew my banker, at the exact moment in my life when I could least afford an enemy or a fortune or a fool's gesture. And out at the fence the ugly horse nickered again, soft, hopeful, the sound carrying thin across the frozen yard, and I found that I did not regret it. Not for a second. I have regretted a great many things in my life, but I have never once regretted that morning, and I have spent the years since trying to understand why. I think it's this. I think there's a kind of poverty that isn't about money at all. I've been living in it for 4 years without a name for it. And that horse, standing at my fence in the cold, blind on one side and scarred across the heart and waiting to be proven wrong about the world, she was the first thing in 4 years that had needed me, and not my land, not my money, not my signature on a bank's bad paper. She needed me. Just me. Just the fact that I was alive and standing there, and had decided, against the arithmetic, to be the answer instead of the arithmetic. Some things are just alive, and that's the whole job. I poured my coffee. I put on my other coat, the heavy one, and I went out to see about my horse, with the sun just breaking over the eastern rim and Delgado's threat still ringing in the frozen air. And I did not yet know, could not have known, that the worst of it and the best of it were both still 40 miles down the road and coming. The reckoning came 11 days later, and it did not come the way I expected, which is the only reliable thing I can tell you about reckonings. I'd braced for the brand inspector. I'd braced for a certified letter for a lawyer's stationery, for the sheriff's brown truck coming up my drive with a court paper and an apologetic look. Delgado had promised me aggravation, and I'd spent 11 days waiting for it to arrive in an official envelope. I'd even called my daughter and told her the whole thing, the horse and the money and the threat, and she'd been quiet a long time on the phone, and then she'd said, "Dad." "Oh, Dad," in a voice that was half exasperation and half something else, something that sounded almost like the mother she'd lost, and she hadn't said sell. That was the first Sunday in 4 years she hadn't said sell. I noticed that. I've thought about it since. In those 11 days the mare changed. Not much. You don't undo years in 11 days. But she stopped eating like the food was going to be stolen. She learned the shape of my day and would come to the fence when she heard the screen door. And once, on the 9th morning, when I bent to check the crack in her off hind hoof, she lowered her big ugly head and rested her chin on my back. All her ruined weight settled trusting across my shoulders, and I stayed bent over like that a long time in the cold with a horse's chin on my spine and my eyes stinging, and I told myself it was the wind. I'd named her by then. I'd fought it. You can't shoot a thing that's been named, and I knew that, and I tried to keep her nameless as long as I could out of pure self-protection, the way you keep a distance from a thing you might yet lose. But a nameless animal you feed twice a day is a lie you can't keep telling. I named her Rain. Because we hadn't had any in so long, and because she'd come to me sideways and unlooked for the way the rain used to before the sky forgot how, and because my wife had loved the smell of it and I wanted an excuse to say the word out loud in my own yard again. Rain. Come on, rain. There's more rain, there's always more. On the 11th day, the dust came up the section road again. I felt it first through my boots, out at the woodpile, and I straightened up with the maul in my hand and watched the tan plume rise, and I thought, here it is. Here comes Delgado, or his lawyer, or the law. And I set the maul down and I walked out to the middle of my yard to meet it standing up, because if a man is going to lose a thing he loves, he should at least be on his feet when it's taken. It wasn't Delgado. It was an old woman in a newer truck, driving slow and careful the way people drive when the driving itself has got to be work. And she pulled into my yard gentle as you please and shut the engine off, and sat there, a moment gathering herself before she opened the door. She got out stiff, one hand on the frame, a small straight-backed woman maybe 80 years old in a canvas coat too big for her, with white hair pinned up under a felt hat that had seen a lot of country, and eyes, I saw when she got close, the pale washed blue of a sky that's given up its rain. "Are you the man," she said without any hello, "who bought the ruined mare off Ray Delgado's truck?" I didn't know what this was yet, but I've learned to answer an old woman straight. "I am Harlan Cobb, ma'am." She looked at me a long moment. Then she looked past me, out toward the paddock, and I watched her whole face change, watched something move across it that I can only call recognition, the exact thing I'd felt 11 days before, the thing I still didn't have a word for, and she made a small sound, one hand coming up to her mouth, and she said, so quiet I almost missed it, "Oh, there you are." Rain had come to the fence. She always came to the fence at the sound of a truck now, hopping it was me. And she stood there with her good eye toward us, and the old woman walked past me without another word, walked straight across my yard with her stiff, careful gait, and went to the fence, and Rain, who flinched at every new hand for the first 3 days, who had learned the world by being hurt by it. Rain put her head over the fence and pressed her whole ugly face against that old woman's chest and stood there shaking. And the old woman wrapped both thin arms around that big scarred head and held on, and neither of them made a sound. And I stood in the middle of my own yard and understood that I was seeing the end of a story I'd only caught the middle of. I gave them their time. I went and busied myself at the woodpile that didn't need me, and I split kindling I didn't need split, and I didn't look, or tried not to. When I finally came back, the old woman was standing at the fence with her hands still on Rain's neck and her eyes wet and her back straight as a fence post, and she'd composed herself, and she told me. Her name was Eula Marsh. She'd had a place out east past Delgado's. A little horse operation she'd run with her husband for 50 years until he died, and then run alone until her hands and her hips and the bank between them made it impossible. Rain, she'd called her something else, a name I'll keep to myself because it was hers and Eula's, and not mine to hand out. Rain had been foaled on her place. She'd raised her from the ground up. And the scar, the terrible scar across the chest, that was barbed wire, a fence gone down in a storm years back, and Eula had sat up with that mare 3 nights running, stitching and packing the wound by lantern light, sure each night she'd lose her, and each morning the mare was still alive, still trying, and that, Eula said, was just how she was made. She never once quit on me, the old woman said. Not once in her life. Even when quitting would have been the mercy. She just kept on being alive at me. Like it was the only job she had. Some things are just alive, and that's the whole job. I didn't say it out loud, but I heard it in Eula's words, in my dead wife's voice, and I had to turn away and look at the mountains a minute. When Eula's operation finally went under, she'd had to sell off her stock, and she'd been promised that the old mare, too ruined to bring a real price, would go to a rescue up north, a good place, green pasture and an easy retirement. She'd cried saying goodbye, but she'd believed it, because the man who bought her string had looked her in the eye and promised. and at 80 you have to believe some things or you can't get out of bed. The man who'd bought her string was Ray Delgado. And Delgado had not sent the old mare north to any rescue. Delgado had put her on a manifest at $200 bound south, to be turned out on fenced land and shot for sport by men with money and afternoons to kill. I only found out, Eula said, because my grandnephew works the sale barn and he heard Delgado talking, bragging near enough, about the exotic hunt outfit and the money in it and the wrecks he ran down there by the trailer load. Her jaw was working. Her hands, I saw, had closed into fists at her sides, thin old fists with the knuckles gone big. I have spent 11 days, Mr. Cobb, believing I sent my girl to be murdered for a rich man's amusement. Believing it was my fault for trusting a liar. I have not slept. I came here today because my nephew tracked the manifest and found she'd been sold off the truck to a man named Cobb, and I did not know, I did not let myself hope, whether I was coming to thank you or to beg you or to find out she'd already been passed along and lost for good. She stopped. She put her hand back on Rain's neck as if to be sure the animal was still there, still warm, still real. And instead, she said, and her voice finally broke, the straight back finally bending, instead I find a stranger who spent his own money. My nephew says you didn't have it to spend, Mr. Cobb, he asked around, don't argue with me, who spent money he didn't have and made an enemy of a dangerous man, for an ugly ruined horse he'd never laid eyes on, that could never do him $1 of good. Why? Why in God's name would you do that? And I stood there in my yard and I did not have a clean answer, because the true answer was too big and too strange, and too tangled up with a grave under 2 cottonwoods, and a coffee can of cash, and a woman 4 years gone who used to name the raccoons. So I said the only true small thing I could get out. She made a sound, I said, coming off the truck, like she'd lost something and couldn't find it, and I couldn't leave a thing making that sound to those men. That's all. That's the whole of it. I'm sorry it's not a better reason. Eula Marsh looked at me for a long time with her pale, rained-out eyes. That's the best reason there is, she said. Now here's where the story should turn easy, and here's where it didn't, because I told you at the start that life keeps the pen going past the good stopping place. Because Eula had come to take her home. Of course she had. That was the whole shape of it, the lost thing found, the rightful owner arrived, the reunion at the fence. Any storyteller worth a nickel would end it there. The old woman leads her old mare up into the newer truck and drives off slow and careful into the pink evening, and the stranger stands in his yard having done a decent thing, and everyone gets what they were owed. Except Eula didn't have a place anymore. That was the trouble. She'd sold the operation. She was living in her nephew's spare room in town, 40 miles the other direction, no land, no barn, no pasture, no way on God's earth to keep a horse. She'd driven out here on a broken heart and a full tank of hope and no plan at all past reaching the fence, and she stood there now with her hand on Rain's neck and the impossible fact settling over her, that she'd found her girl alive and could not have her. I watched it land on her. I watched the old woman understand that the reunion was also a second goodbye, and I watched her decide to be brave about it, decide to take her 10 minutes at the fence and be grateful for them and drive back to a spare room in town, because that was all the world was going to allow her, and she was 80, and she knew better than to argue with what the world allowed. Well, she said, too bright, straightening the back again, patting Rain's neck the way you pat a thing you're saying goodbye to. Well, she's got a good home here. That's more than I dared. I'll come see her if that's all right. Now and again, if it's not too far, I won't be a bother. And here is the emotionally heavy decision, the one the whole thing had been walking toward, though I didn't see the shape of it until I was standing inside it. Because I could have let her have that. The 10 minutes and the goodbye and the come see her now and again. It would have cost me nothing. I'd have kept my horse, whom I'd already come to love more than made any sense, and I'd have been the good stranger who saved her, and Eula would have driven home and I'd have gone on feeding Rain twice a day and telling her there's more, there's always more, and it would have been, by any fair reckoning, a happy ending. But I looked at the two of them at the fence. The old blind in one-eye mare and the old rained-out woman, both of them at the end of their roads, both of them out of pasture and out of time, both of them holding onto each other because they'd each been the one thing in the world the other couldn't lose, and I understood that Rain was never mine. I'd known it, I think, since the ramp. She'd looked at me and I'd looked at her, and I'd told myself we recognized each other, but that wasn't it. What I'd recognized was the shape of a love with the other half missing. I'd been carrying my own missing half up on the rise under the cottonwoods for 4 years. I knew that shape anywhere. And here, in my yard, was the missing half, arrived on the section road in a canvas coat too big for her, and I was the only man alive standing in a position to put the two halves back together. Some things are just alive, and that's the whole job. But some things are more than alive. Some things belong to each other, and when you're lucky enough to be standing at the exact spot where the two halves of a broken thing can be made whole, the arithmetic doesn't get a vote. It never should have. It never should have had a vote in any of it. "Eula," I said, "how would it be if you didn't drive her anywhere?" She turned. "I don't follow." "I've got 40 acres of hay ground gone to weeds since I sold down my herd," I said, and I was working it out even as I said it, the way you work out a thing your heart's already decided and your head is only now catching up to. "I've got a barn with 4 empty stalls. I've got more paddock than I've got animals to put in it. I've got, God help me, more room than I've got reasons to keep going most days. And you've got no place to keep her and a nephew's spare room 40 miles off. And you're not getting any younger and neither am I made myself say the rest of it, the part that mattered. So keep her here. She's yours, she was always yours. I never had any claim on her but the $200 and you can pay me back a nickel at a time or never, I don't care. Keep her here on my ground. And you come out, not now and again. You come out whenever you please. You come out every day if you want to. There's a spare room in my house too, come to that, been empty 4 years. And it's no business of anybody's whether an old widower rents it to an old widow so she can be near her horse. Let people talk. Let Delgado choke on it." The old woman stared at me. Rain, between us, swung her big head from one of us to the other, tracking the voices with her good eye. "You don't know me," Eula said faintly. "You don't know either one of us. 2 days ago, you didn't know we were alive." "No," I agreed. "But she made a sound coming off that truck, ma'am, and I couldn't leave it. And I find I can't leave you either. So there it is. That's my offer, and it's a fool's offer, and I've made nothing but fool's offers for 11 days, and every one of them's been the best thing I ever did." Eula Marsh put her face in her thin old hands and cried then. Finally, all the way you cry when a thing you'd made yourself stop hopping for arrives anyway, sideways, with the wrong paperwork, looking like nothing you'd have known to ask for. And Rain, alarmed at the sound, pushed her ugly head over the fence and pressed it against the old woman's shoulder, and Eula wrapped one arm around the horse and reached the other hand out blind and gripped my forearm. Hard, harder than an 80-year-old woman ought to be able to grip. And she didn't say yes and she didn't say no. She just held on to the horse and to me, to both halves of what she'd almost lost, and that was answer enough. Delgado came out eventually, of course. Sent the brand inspector like he'd promised. A decent man named Fuentes who heard the whole story standing in my yard and looked at the manifest and looked at the scar on that mare's chest and looked at Eula, and then folded the paper up and put it in his pocket and said the sale was clean. The sale was clean as he'd ever seen, and Delgado could take his complaint to the county and see how far it got him once Fuentes told the county what that mare had been contracted for. It never went anywhere. Delgado, it turned out, did not want the brand inspector and the sheriff and the county paper looking too hard at where his monthly trailer loads of wrecks were headed and why. Some men only bully as far as the daylight. He stopped calling. His outfit down south, I heard, had a bad year with the law not long after. I like to think Fuentes had a hand in it. I don't ask. That was 6 years ago now. Rain died last spring. I want to be honest about that too, because I promised you at the start I'd tell it right, and telling it right means telling the end. She was old when she came to me, and she was older when she went. And she went easy, in the good grass in the near paddock on a warm evening with both of us there, Eula and me, one of us on each side of her big ugly head, and she made a sound at the very last that I'll not describe because it was hers. We buried her up on the rise, under the 2 cottonwoods next to my wife. Eula said it was too much, said she couldn't ask that of me, and I said she wasn't asking, and we dug it together, the 2 of us, an old man and an old woman with a shovel each, taking turns resting more than we dug, and we got it done by dark. Eula's still here. The spare room stopped being the spare room a long time ago. People did talk at first, and then they got bored, the way people do, and now we're just the old Cobb Marsh place out the section road, and nobody remembers why it's 2 names or thinks to ask. She's 90 now, and her hands don't work, and neither do mine, and we don't run much stock, and the roof still lets the sky in over the kitchen when it rains hard, which, and this is the thing I can hardly believe it does now. It rains now. The drought broke the second spring rain was here, and it's rained more or less on time ever since, and I know that's just weather. I know a horse doesn't bring the rain. I'm not a superstitious man, and I won't pretend to be one. But her name was Rain, and I named her that before the rain came back. And when it comes now, the real rain, the good soaking kind, Eula and I sit on the porch under the dry part of the roof and watch it come across the country in a gray wall, and we don't say much, and we don't have to, and I think about arithmetic. I spent 51 years believing a thing was worth exactly what it was worth, and not $1 more. I'd have argued it with God over a cup of bad coffee. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about the whole of it. The ugliest, most ruined, most worthless thing that ever came up my drive, worthless. The manifest said, $200, a mouth and a heartbreak and a slow argument with the ground, was worth more than everything else I own put together. And I only found it out because a hauler took a wrong turn off the county road on a cold afternoon and unloaded a horse I never ordered onto a ranch that was quietly going broke. Somebody once told me the best things in life don't come the way you order them. They come sideways. I know that now. God help me, I know it. I just wish I'd known it while I still had time to tell her she was right. But the grass is green, and it's raining again this evening, soft and steady on the dry part of the roof, and there's an old woman beside me in a chair that used to be empty, and up on the rise under the cottonwoods there are 2 graves and a third smaller one, and I think,